Welcome to Lead the Way with Anna Gauker. Your guide, Anna Gauker, is on a quest of her own to find effective ways of creating change and inclusion in our communities. You have come to the right place if you believe in truth, justice, and coffee. Thanks for joining us.
This is Lead the Way, and I am Anna Gauker. If you have been enjoying this journey as we explore innovative leadership styles, make sure that you rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. In this episode, we are continuing our series examining restorative justice as an alternative to the traditional criminal justice system by sharing a conversation that I recently had with Lorrie Hurckes Dwyer, Executive Director of the Dane County TimeBank. For those of you who are not familiar with the Dane County TimeBank, it operates on the time banking model, and this is how it works. When members provide a service for the other members, 1 TimeBank hour is earned for each hour spent providing the service. Members can then exchange each TimeBank hour earned for an hour of service from someone else. The Dane County TimeBank is also actively involved in the Restorative Justice Initiative for Youth in Dane County, Wisconsin. Here now is Lorrie Hurckes Dwyer. Can we start by hearing a little bit about how you got involved at the Dane County TimeBank?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been involved at the Dane County TimeBank since the end of 2007. Before I worked at the TimeBank, I worked in mental health and did a lot of case management for adults at the time in Madison with some mental health and mental wellness stuff happening. And at the time, I was really frustrated with the mental health system because people that didn't have money or didn't have private insurance who were like experiencing stuff that they wanted to get help for just couldn't access it and couldn't get help. And so a lot of times it seemed like the only way that, because the waiting lists were so long and the criteria was a certain way with insurances and all this stuff, so the only way that people could access services was, frankly, when they were having significant crises that ended up costing the city and county money. So like police contact, showing up at the ERs, different things like that. And then they would get bumped up to the waiting list. And so I was just really bummed about the inability for people to access support when they were actively seeking support. And then the other piece that I was struggling with was, at the time in the mental health field, there was a lot of, the buzzwords was client-driven care, things like that. And I just didn't really feel like that was true. In going to like a lot of psychiatrist appointments with people and a lot of advocacy kind of appointments for people, it really didn't feel like people were valuing people as individual people, and it felt like there was a lot of judgment and it was a lot of things were predetermined in terms of people's care. And so at the time, the Dane County TimeBank was young, a year and a half old or 2 years old at the time. And it was just starting, the TimeBank received one of its very first funding sources that allowed the TimeBank to have a paid staff person. And so I heard about the TimeBank, and I was really intrigued from the very beginning, coming from a mental health background, in terms of some of the values associated with time banking, and that, everybody has something to offer, everybody has something that they can do for others in the community, and it really was a shift from a provider-client kind of dynamic to neighbors supporting each other. In community, which I was really excited about. And then the whole idea, I was thinking also like, talk about client-driven care. There's so much more to wellness than just like making sure people's basic needs are met. And time banking to me was a way to really value people for who they are and what they have to offer and how they can contribute to us, to the larger community. So I started at the TimeBank in a really very, very part-time position. And then the TimeBank has been doing restorative justice work in our youth court project since the very beginning, since 2006. And so I sort of jumped in terms of getting involved in that project from pretty early on. And I've had lots of different experience throughout my career in mental health, working with kids and families and systems, and mental health work kind of intersects a lot with different types of systems, like the criminal justice system and the mental health, and the drug and alcohol system, school system, human services, all that kind of stuff.
Do you think that there is a lot of community awareness? Like, what do you feel like the public needs to know about the Dane County TimeBank overall?
Overall, the Dane County TimeBank is a huge network of community members in Dane County who are coming together because they believe in community. They believe in supporting each other as a community and working together to meet both our individual needs, but also our community needs. Time banking is very versatile and super nimble, and there's so many ways that people are time banking and exchanging their time in support of one another. So it's anything from like individual one-on-one kind of matches to larger scale projects that are addressing community issues.
And it kind of operates on membership, correct?
Yeah.
How many members do you have?
There's close to 3,000 members.
Wow.
The Dane County TimeBank is one of the largest time banks in the world. There's time banks all over the world, all over the United States. And we're really fortunate in Dane County. We have one of the largest and most diverse in terms of how we're applying time banking to do different projects and address different issues.
And you said that restorative justice was part of the model from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about? How did that focus on restorative justice get incorporated so early on?
When Stephanie Rurick was founding the TimeBank, from the very beginning she was working with people, and it's the whole idea that we can support youth better in the community than by ticketing and arresting them. And so that mindset and philosophy was there from the very start. And also at the time there was a time bank in Washington D.C. that was facilitating a youth court, a large-scale youth court project in Washington D.C. Where they were utilizing the model to, I think they worked with 1,400 kids a year or something like that. So it was this widespread initiative to address situations that kids are involved in outside of the formal system as much as possible. So when Stephanie was founding the TimeBank, right away, efforts were being made to make something similar here. And we were very fortunate because we had some very active early participants that really helped to advance that here locally, including Sherry Maples and others who were really linked to that system.
How would you say the time bank stands out from other restorative justice leaders in our community?
I mean, I think the thing that makes us unique is that, the time bank is neighbors helping neighbors. So we approach a lot of this work as how can we increase people's natural supports within the community to help people move forward positively in this situation? How can we provide opportunities through the time bank to offer different types of opportunities for youth to get involved in, for example, that they may or may not have access to outside of the time bank because things cost money, So I think it's things like that. I think that because of the connection to the time bank, when our youth are working with other youth and doing processes, when they're able to be really creative in terms of how does everyone feel we can support each other, and what are people's strengths, what are people's interests, and how can we get people engaged positively. And the connection to the time bank allows us to, if a youth expresses interest in, for example, being a lawyer, one component of their agreement might be to meet with a lawyer in the time bank to talk about, well, what is that like? What does that take? Or if a youth says, I'm really interested in guitar, a component of their agreement may be to do some guitar lessons through the time bank, or to do some mentoring, or to do some whatever, So these relationships that are developed between time bank members and youth, those relationships are able to continue on well after the student or the young person, fulfills their agreement. So it's an attempt at providing longer-term, sustainable, healthy relationships.
And your program, I read a bit about, you also serve adults, correct?
So the time bank does a variety of restorative justice work. So we're part of the Youth City Initiative, and we partner with Briar Patch and YWCA to provide restorative justice alternatives for kids that are between 12 and 16 in the city of Madison who would be getting municipal violations. And then the time bank also runs restorative justice sessions in the Madison high schools and Verona High School to address different situations that are happening at the school in an effort to sort of disrupt school-to-prison pipeline types of issues. And then the time bank is also involved in a restorative justice project that's focusing on processes for people that are experiencing homelessness, who are getting a lot of tickets and arrests associated with not having a home, to participate in a process and pull in additional resources and things like that, so that people don't end up, eventually getting housed, but then having this significant debt associated with fines and tickets and arrests associated with things that are specific to issues of not having a home.
And I'm also just curious, how do you let people know who are experiencing homelessness that this is available? So
that project is, the time bank's role in it is more of a coordination type of function. Mm-hmm. So we work with partners through that project to spread the word. There are partners through Sankofa, there's partners through the YWCA, there's partners through the court system, Homeless Services Consortium, and others who are interfacing with people all the time. And so that's a word of mouth and programs reaching out and saying, hey, flyers and postings in various spaces.
Excellent. So then they know exactly how to go about utilizing this.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how the time bank first established a partnership with the Madison Police Department and the Madison Metropolitan Schools?
Sure. So we first established, well, a couple of things. Very, very early on, we were working with Sherry Maples, who was involved in the Madison Police Department. She was a leader within that department. She was on the TimeBank board when the TimeBank was founded. And then we also had a relationship with Greg Rossetti, who is a Madison Police officer. And Greg, at the time, was a neighborhood officer in the Darbo-Worthington neighborhood. And he was familiar with the TimeBank and really loved the concept of it, really loved the idea of it. And he knew that we were trying to start a youth court, and he wanted that in the Darbo neighborhood. He was like in a situation where he was, ticketing kids and arresting kids, and he didn't feel like that was helping in any way. And so he wanted to do something different. And so those were our initial connections. And then those two individuals were really critical in terms of getting an initial relationship with Madison Police Department sort of going, because they were able to speak to other people within the police department in terms of, this is why this is impactful, this is why this is a good idea for us to participate in, et cetera, et cetera. And so our first youth court, which began in 2006 in the Darbo-Worthington neighborhood, it was super small. And Greg Rossetti, as the neighborhood officer, he got permission from the district captain to just start referring youth to it as an alternative. And it was really, like I said, it was really small. It was really sort of under the radar kind of a thing. And then we were starting to get some positive results. So then it started getting more attention, and then more defined partnerships started to happen within MPD. And the connection to La Follette was, to Madison's school district is in the 2008-2009 school year, Officer Rossetti became the educational resource officer at La Follette High School. And at the time, there was a lot of stuff going on. The police were writing a lot of tickets to kids at the time, like 2,500 tickets a year to kids at the time. And we started talking about capacity and what could we do with the resources we had and things like that. And there was discussions that were happening between the police department, the TimeBank, Briar Patch Youth Services, who was also doing peer courts in Madison and surrounding areas at the time, and the school district in terms of how can we utilize this model to have more impact. And when Officer Rossetti became the officer at La Follette High School, he really wanted to do something like that there. And the principal, who Joe Gothard at the time, was really invested in doing something different. And it was really great because at the time, there was a significant number of, there was around 500 tickets a year coming out of the Madison high schools. And there was like around 160 or so coming out of La Follette High School. And so as we got going, the police officer was just referring all this stuff to us where the youth could like really explore what was happening and make decisions around what to do. And it drastically reduced the number of formal tickets that were coming out of La Follette. So it started as a pilot project, but after a couple of years, the number of tickets coming out went from like 160 down to like 40, down to like 10 and things like that. And so it became, in that sort of contained environment, it became really apparent in terms of the potential for not only impacting the number of tickets, but also impacting the culture and climate within that school. And so then very shortly after that, the Madison School District wanted to replicate that model in each of the 4 main high schools.
So you really took the lead in creating this pilot program and collaborating with other individuals to shine a light on the need and how empowering individuals would create greater outcomes. And you were tracking that progress and sharing the results with the community. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, so we were keeping track of all kinds of data associated with who was being referred, why they were being referred, the number of students getting formal tickets, the number of students being referred to us instead, and things like that. And we continue to monitor that kind of thing. Last school year, we were having a challenge in terms of transparency and sort of in real time, being able to understand in the schools, when are officers writing formal tickets and when are they referring to youth court, and what's their criteria for doing one or the other. And we found, we found in the 2017 and 18 school year, the police officers in the schools were only referring like 35% of kids that were eligible to the process. And so then we did a lot of advocacy work to address that, because that's there's potential for bias in decision making at that point. And so we worked and partnered with others to essentially eliminate the officer discretion in that situation. So it was agreed upon by the police department and the school district to, if a student in the high schools was at risk of receiving a municipal citation, they should be referred to their school-based youth court. And that was a huge thing, because tickets and arrests for kids, there's so much data about the impact that has in a negative way for youth. And a lot of what we see is, honestly, it's like within the range of relatively normal behavior, and kids sometimes are getting criminalized for things that fall within behavior that kids do.
Right. Just young people.
Young people experiment. Yeah, young people experiment. They test boundaries. They experiment with this and that. They have undeveloped brain. Their brains aren't developed. They don't have the ability in the same way that adults do to pause, think through the consequence. All those things, all those expectations are really challenging sometimes for youth, especially when they're feeling heated and emotional and all of that. And it's all very complex too because of the disparities in who is being ticketed, who is being arrested, who is being suspended, who is being expelled, those types of things.
In your work with Briar Patch and YWCA, mm-hmm. How do you see the TimeBank's role in filling a need? Do you think at all about how to provide restorative justice uniquely, or does it fit along a continuum for you? How do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because the citywide initiative, the partnership between Briar Patch, TimeBank, and YWCA started in the fall of 2015. There was a proposal that was put out there to do restorative justice as alternatives to ticketing as this pilot project. And Chief Koval didn't want to do a pilot project. He wanted to do a full-on citywide initiative. And so the three of our organizations were like, all right, we got to come together. We got to make this happen. This is a big opportunity to prevent a lot of kids from sliding down the slope of, into the more formal justice system. So we have to be able to provide this interruption and to be able to try to work with youth and families to help them move forward positively from whatever the situation might have been. And so initially when our organizations came together, it took a while for us all to sort of gel. I mean, we're 3 organizations that are doing similar work who previously had been competing for funding, so there are the same dynamics that exist throughout the community in terms of people doing their work a bit in silos, people competing for resources and things like that. So it took us a while to build trust within our partnership and within the people involved, and to come to a place where we are today. And I think about it all the time. I completely value this partnership, because what we've done from when we've started to where we are now, which is 5 years in, is to work together to get in alignment in terms of what is our philosophy around restorative justice, what is our philosophy in our shared philosophy in addressing these situations, where does the intersection of race and power and all these other complex issues, where does it all come into play, and how do you weigh that all out, and how do you look at harm in a situation to be able to repair harm in a situation? A lot of what we talk about is associated with harm, because that's what restorative justice is about. And, well, I shouldn't say it like that. Restorative justice is about community. Restorative justice is about celebrating each other in community, supporting each other in community, and addressing situations when situations come up in community. And through our work together, we're really deeply looking at harm involved in these situations. And that's everything from systemic harm, harm associated with contact with law enforcement. There's many kids that come through, and the harm that they caused in the actual incident is nothing in comparison to the trauma that they experienced in the escalation of the way the situation was handled, and their how they feel about the contact with law enforcement. So there's the big picture stuff of what is going on in our society, and how that level of harm impacts what's actually happening on the day-to-day, and so how do we collectively discuss, explore, talk about, and push systems to shift how they're approaching things? Because straight up ticketing and arresting and straight up punishment and exclusionary practices, it's harmful, and there's tons of data that shows how harmful it is. And so our partnership is very much exploring what else can we do, and how do we shift how we're looking at these situations, and how do we broaden the focus from youth accountability to community accountability, because it's all interrelated.
Right. And I've read that the outcomes have been quite successful for specifically your programs in the schools with young people. It said 94% of people who are participating complete the program. How will you measure the long-term goals that you have, and how will you know that the Time Bank is making the impact that was originally established?
I mean, our long-term goals are associated with shifting how we respond. Our long-term goals are associated with helping youth feel supported in their community. Our long-term goals are also associated with shifting from a culture of like crisis response, like using restorative practices as a crisis response or a behavior response, and then to shifting that to using restorative practices for like community building and trust building and having healthy dialogue and things like that, because that shift to more front end kind of work, that's where we want to go. You'll always have to respond when things happen, of course, but like there's support and stuff that we can give to each other, especially through time banking and through the time bank on the front end, where hopefully then you can impact what's happening on the back end. And so we're looking at all of that. And I mean, we're interested in reducing the number of tickets that are happening for kids. We're interested in preventing as many kids as possible from hitting the formal system, because of all the data and all the evidence in showing that how that system isn't effective in supporting or changing behavior even.
Well, what would you say is maybe something that everyone should know, that if someone doesn't know anything about restorative justice, what would you want them to hear?
That restorative justice is a process. Restorative justice is something, restorative justice is a process and a philosophy that we use to address situations when they come up. And sometimes in my experience, what I've seen is people think that restorative justice is like easy, or it's like, oh yeah, this thing happened, let's do restorative justice. But people also have to understand that, like, in order to be able to bring people together to address a harm, people have to be in a space where they're able to hear each other and are able to listen to other people's perspectives, so that everybody can feel heard and feel valued, and people can move forward positively. So I think that a lot of times restorative justice is like viewed as this like thing that you do that fixes these things, but it's it's a process, and the process of, like, when you're heated or when something is going on, you got to get to a calm space before you can enter into any kind of like, oh yeah, let's get this resolved kind of thing. And I think part of the challenge with restorative justice is that in different contexts, people just get thrown together or like to try to address this situation, but there's not enough care on the front end and like prep work to get people ready to actually deal with the situation in a healthy way. So I would say that's something to know, is that it's not an easy process. It's not a quick process. It's not a quick fix. You don't change behavior through one conversation with somebody. It's like an ongoing thing where you're working with people and you're working to get people to a place where of mutual respect for everybody and value of everybody and seeing everybody, things like that.
I was just having a conversation with someone about this very subject, and we were talking about how when a situation comes up, if someone feels wronged, it's so automatic for sometimes that individual to want punishment to come out of it. And I would imagine that that's a major challenge to sharing the objective of this specific approach because the idea of punishment is not part of it. So if that's what someone's looking for, then it can probably lead to some difficulty.
Yeah. And I think that, that's a huge challenge. Punishment like that mindset is pretty dominant, in our society and in our culture. And so it does make it hard. It also makes it hard in situations where, say for example, in a school where something happens, perhaps between like a student and an adult in that building, and then the adult like is very focused on the behavior, because they're impacted by whatever happened, and they want this kid's behavior to change, or they want this kid to take accountability for what happened in that situation. But restorative justice is really about like exploring that whole thing with everybody that's involved in the harm, including the adults associated with it, including the youth associated. It's more than, restorative justice is so much more than like youth accountability or accountability of one person. And that unfortunately is the way that's why restorative justice like gets a bad rap in some ways, because it's in some ways sort of restorative justice is like it's like buzzwords in some ways, and it's being and it has the potential to be sort of co-opted by these larger systems that are more used to punitive structures, right? And so it makes it challenging because those structures want immediate changes. They want behavior changing. They want, accountability. They want to see these results in a different kind of way. And restorative justice really is about like, let's all talk about our role in why this happened. It's much broader.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you again to Lorrie. It was great to have the opportunity to learn from her. And for the third episode in our series on restorative justice, we will be speaking with several individuals at the YWCA Madison in the next couple of weeks. If you have questions that you would like to be included in the interview, please send them to us on Facebook. You can find us at Lead the Way Podcast. And if you are inclined to submit a question, it may be in the next episode. This episode was brought to you by the time and talent of Buzz Kemper and Tyler Willenbrink. I'm Anna Gauker. Until next time.